Good evening, everybody. That was honor song that I played many, many times. I learned from my friend Floyd Red Crow Westerman, and our special guest this evening, Joanne Shenandoah, and her husband, who's also here, Don George, will be here with us as well. And we're just so happy that they can be here. And we've actually, Floyd and I played that song 30 some years ago in front of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. And one of the young people who was at that concert was Joanne Shenandoah. And now, all these years later, she plays all over the world. And her husband, Doug George, wonderful writer, author, spokesman, is also going to be speaking. And her own children are accomplished musicians, and we're all still here. And we're so glad that you're here to join us on, I guess, about our 9th Sunday night of reading Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac. And Jack was very interested in all of America, and including the people who were here for thousands of years before all of us who came over in boats were lucky enough to be here too. So she'll be speaking to us and talking on the second half, and so will her husband, Doug. And that alone is worth, if there were a price for admission, you'd be getting a bargain of the century. And the fact that it's free doesn't mean it's worthless. It means it's priceless. We want to thank Pamela Dickerson and
Hello.
Demarbia, the wonderful engineer, actor, writer, author, musician, who is also a technical wizard. James Canary, the keeper of Kerouac's scroll, who's been with us every week. And we're hoping he'd come one time. He's been here every week and blesses us with all his knowledge. And I'm going to read now from where we left off, just a paragraph. I was describing the very last phone call I had with Jack Kerouac in 1969, just before he passed away.
Davey, will you tell us what page you're on for some of us that like to follow along?
Of course. If you have this copy of the book, because there's several editions, but this is the one that's out now. It's on page 161.
Thank you.
And I'm going to read, okay. I thank the person I was with who was nice enough to understand what I was hanging out with Jack all night long at different times. And when we were on the phone at 4 o'clock in the morning, that it was important. And I said to her, okay, Melanie, I said, I love you. You're really understanding. There's not much to understand, she said. All you guys just need to calm down and grow up. If I wanted to be with the dentist, I wouldn't have chosen you. I'm glad that you and Jack talked. I know how much you love each other and how much you worry about one another. Aren't you glad you spoke and played music with him on the phone? You're the most positive person I ever met in my life. Why do you look so sad? You guys will be together soon. I hope so, I said, but I don't know. He didn't sound right. He'll be fine. All those ex-football players live forever. I'll see you tonight when I get back from work, and we'll go to Casey's for dinner. A few weeks later, I climbed the stairs of my Sixth Avenue apartment and sat down with my lox, cream cheese, tuna fish, onions, Swiss cheese, capers, and horseradish sauce for a breakfast lunch special sandwich on rye bread that Igor Sudarsky of the Arch Foods Delicatessen let me go behind the counter each day and make for myself. I had 3 cups of coffee, and before starting work, I turned on the answering machine. Dave, Ted Jones here. No number right now. Did you hear about Jack? I heard early this morning that Jack had died. Have you heard anything? I didn't bother to check my other messages. I called the wire service where Lucian Carr had been working for years. Surely he would know what happened, but I couldn't get through. I didn't want to call any of Jack's friends in case it was a mistake. I sat down at the piano and played. I prayed for his soul and said a Kaddish and kissed an old mass card he had given me in 1957. I could still hear his voice fill this room. He always retained the music of his Lowell, Massachusetts accent whenever he spoke. The special sounds of Lowell's Little Canada, a sound that still speaks to my heart every day. The phone rang and I answered. David, this is Richard Bellamy. I guess you heard the news. He's left us. Richard was the bishop in Pull My Daisy and had a small art gallery in real life and was a great friend to all of us. I imagine they'll have a funeral up in Lowell at the church he was a member as a boy. I'll go up with you, but I'm afraid it will become a public circus, one of those orgies of self-promotion that seems to be the dynamic of the 60s. Can you drive up? I don't know, Richard, I said. I have a concert in Washington and it's the same day. I could fly up and fly backwards, but I don't know if I want to go there either, especially if it becomes a beatniks versus the locals confrontation. Jack was a devout Catholic. He would want a traditional service. That's why I'm not going, said Richard. I don't want to be up there and see people leap in front of the cameras and have a beatnik circus. I feel terrible loss and compassion for his wife and all those who truly loved him through his life. Lucian Carr and Carolyn Cassidy, Joyce Johnson and Dodie Muller must be devastated. Let's all pray for him and keep his memory alive. Now that he's gone, he'll begin to really be appreciated for what he left us. I never knew anyone like him. Oh, thank you for calling, Richard. You really helped me to deal with this, I said. I hung up the phone and the phone rang again. Old friends from all over the country, Canada, and some from Europe called all day and all that night. Many were crying. I had to cheer them up by telling them the wonderful things in his life that he had done for countless others and the fun we'd had together. Reporters also called up from around the world. Usually the first questions were, are you the David Amram who played with Jack Kerouac and wrote the music for the beatnik film Pull My Daisy and with Kerouac and composed with him? Do you think he died from an overdose of drugs? I know it must be a difficult time for you to talk. Can you tell my readers his beatnik philosophy? Are you the Beat Generation composer named David Amram who worked with Jack Kerouac? If so, why do you think he killed himself? You have my sincere condolences. Could you give us your thoughts? I was brought up to be respectful to every human being who walks the earth, so I gritted my teeth when the words beatnik and Beat Generation came before Jack's name. I try to answer each person in the best way I could. Since each reporter asked me for a statement, I wrote one down and I read it to them. I was lucky enough to know him, to be his friend, to work with him, and maintain my friendship with him from the time we met, and he will always be in my heart. He was one of the great writers of the English language and is yet to be fully appreciated. He will return to rest in his hometown of Lowell, where he always loved and never forgot where he was from. Musicians, poets, painters, actors, and everyday people now have a more inclusive and compassionate world to live in because of what he left us all in his books and in his actions towards other people. Every single reporter then asked me, in some form or another, one of the following questions: Are you still a beatnik? Why was he no longer the king of the beat generation? Do all you beatniks still advocate free love, drugs, and flag burning? Who will be the new king of the beat generation? I knew if I uttered one curse word or said one sentence that sounded abusive, that would be what ended up in any of the articles or obituaries. May I read you my statement again slowly? I asked. Perhaps some part of it might be useful in some way to answer some of your questions. I understand that you have a job to do and are restricted by deadlines. That won't be necessary, was the universal response. Then the same questions were asked again. I knew that not one word of what I said would be used in any of them. They heard what they wanted to hear. Melanie came home about 6:30 and hugged me for about 5 minutes. I'm sorry, sweetie, but at least he's not in pain anymore. And look at the gift he left the world. Let's watch the news. Melody turned on my old black and white TV set with the clothes hanger aerial wrapped in tinfoil, and we flipped the channels and saw the reports. Somehow, it made Jack's death seem more final. The phone kept ringing, and I kept reading my statement and then trying to be polite to the interviewers who needed a few lines to reinforce the hideous slant that their editors were forcing them to pursue to guide their stories. Finally, at 9 p.m., Melody said, "Turn on the answering machine. Let's go to Casey's and celebrate Jack's life. None of these reporters can possibly use anything you're saying. They want blood and guts, beatniks with berets and bongos. Now that the so-called hippie revolution has turned out to be a disaster and is no longer in fashion, they have to find something else to dump on. Maybe they'll start reading Jack's books," I said. That's all he ever wanted. The next afternoon, I got a phone call from someone who claimed to be an assistant to an editor of a major corporate type publication that was supposed to support the revolution. It was sponsored entirely by record companies. "Mr. Amram, we would like to know if we could photograph you at the funeral services of Jack Kerouac, playing the French horn next to his open casket. The editor would like you to wear a beret and possibly sandals to make it look authentic for our readers. If this is agreeable, we will do a follow-up feature article about you, even though you are currently not with any major record label. When are you planning to be at the service in Lowell?" "I'm not going to be there," I said. "But I understand you were very close. I can't believe you won't be there. Could you tell us why?" "You just talked me out of it," I said, and I hung up the phone. At my orchestral and chamber concert in Washington at the Corcoran Art Gallery, Ken Pasmanic, my friend from 1947, played my trio for tenor, saxophone, horn, and bassoon. I had written it in 1958 when I lived on Christopher Street. Much of it was written when Jack was crashing out there with Father Rover, Lamentia, and Howard Hart on my floor or a couch or a sleeping bag. I told Ken I would dedicate the concert and this piece to him and his family. "That's beautiful, David," said Ken. I remember meeting Charlie Parker with you and how we played for him in your basement apartment in 1952 down there. I feel like I almost knew Kerouac from all you told me about him. Now you're back in Washington and we're playing for him. He may be gone now, but what he wrote will outlive us all. I'll give you trio to some extra neshama, that's Yiddish for soul, when we play tonight, just for him. I dedicated the concert to Jack, and a few days later, the editor, Barney Rossett, called me up. David, Evergreen Review wants a memorial tribute for Jack. We would like you to write it. You stayed friends with him until the end. I knew he wanted you to do it. Just be yourself. Don't try to be literary. Just do it the way you speak. Tell the readers about him. It's devastating what happened to him and so many other great American writers of this century. We have to keep his memory alive till all his books are back in print. Barney was one of the lights in the second half of the 20th century in American publishing. Grove Press made history, not only in breaking the bonds of censorship, but in publishing Jack's Pull My Daisy, works by Genet, and a vast number of great writers before they were discovered by the public at large. His ex-wife, Joan Mitchell, was an outstanding artist and a mentor of mine in Paris in 1954-55. And when I first arrived in New York, they both loved Jack and his work. I would have done anything for either one of them. I could pay you just $50, enough to cover the cost of one of those enormous sandwiches that you make at Igor's Art Foods Delicatessen each day, and dinner for you and Melanie at Casey's. But I'd be grateful if you could do it, and Jack's family would be as well. When can you get it to me? Tomorrow, I said. I'll stay up all night and write it. And if Melanie digs it, I'll meet you at the Art Foods Deli tomorrow at lunch, and you'll have it. When Melanie came in and saw me typing, she looked over my shoulder. Stay right there, David. Don't move. I'll get you supper, a midnight snack, and breakfast. Turn off the phone. Who is it for? Barney Rossett, I said. Perfect, she said. He'll expect the best you can possibly do and appreciate it. I wrote and rewrote, took cat naps, and kept changing little things throughout the night. I wanted to get it right. This wasn't about me. It was about Jack, from one of the few people who stayed close to him from before On the Road came out until his death. I had purposely avoided going to the funeral in Lowell because I didn't want to add to the growing sea of misinformation, mythology, and inaccurate representation of so many of us were forced to see. Formed during the rich artistic era of the late 40s and 50s. I didn't have time to write another 465-page book like Vibrations in one night. So I had to telescope all that Jack meant to me in a few pages. I finished at about 3 a.m. and fell asleep in Melanie's arms. I'm taking off work today. I'm going to the Art Foods Deli with you and Barney, and we'll go to Casey's tonight to celebrate your $50 payment for writing the tribute, which will be well spent. It's beautiful, honey. Melanie and I went to lunch with Barney, and while I went back behind the counter to make one of my colossal 2,000-calorie health sandwiches, Barney read the tribute. David, he said, it's perfect. It will be published in our January 1970 issue exactly the way you wrote it. Maybe you can give me some of your sandwich making recipes so that I could suggest a special diet to all my authors to give them the energy to get their work to me ahead of time. We ate and talked about Jack. Let's go to a movie, David, said Melody. Don't go upstairs and write music. Let's take one day off this year like normal people. We went to the 42nd Street theaters and saw two old Humphrey Bogart movies and then went to Casey's for supper. David, you're a special guest tonight, said Casey. I don't want you running home and getting your horn and sitting in with Freddie Red, at least not till 11 p.m. We'll have a table for you and Melody. Casey had been an old buddy of mine since 1960, and I always sat at the musician's table next to the piano. I'd gone out with one of his waitresses before I met Melody, and because I played there all the time, I was almost like one of the staff. I had never sat down in the elegant early dinner crowd part of the restaurant. Are you sure you want us sitting here? I asked Casey. Positive, he said. He brought Melody and me over to a small table for two. On top of the table, between two lit candles, was a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket and a note attached. Dear David, from Joan and me from Evergreen, with thanks to you for remembering Jack Party. Melody and I ate and we drank champagne. Freddie Red came in at 9 p.m. to play. Damn, David, said Freddie, smiling. You're sitting here with all the white folks. Did you hit the number? No, Freddie, I said. I just wrote a memorial tribute for Jack Kerouac for Evergreen Review. And Barney Russet gave us a surprise meal. That's beautiful, said Freddie. We'll sure miss that cat. I just talked to Sahib Shahab last week when he was visiting some folks in Brooklyn. He was talking about playing on the Pull My Daisy soundtrack, and what a righteous cat Jack was. They sure gave it to him when it looked like he wasn't going to make the big dollars anymore, just like Bird. He was too beautiful to be here for a long time. He was such a warm cat. Freddie played, and I sat holding Melanie's hand, closed my eyes, and listened. As I heard Freddie's beautiful improvisations fill the room, I thought about all the times Jack and I spent together and how much Jack enjoyed life and what an inspiration he was to others. I knew in my heart that his best days were yet to come. The following is a memorial tribute that I wrote for Evergreen Review, word for word, as I handed it to Barney Rossett on October 24th, 1969. Chapter 12 is called In Memory of Jack Kerouac, and here's what I wrote. I used to see Jack often at the old Five Spot in the beginning of 1957 when I was working there. I knew he was a writer, and all musicians knew that he loved music. You could tell by the way he sat and listened. He never tried to seem hip. He was too interested in life around him to ever think of how he appeared. Musicians understood this and were always glad to see him because we knew that meant at least one person would be listening. Jack was on the same wavelength as we were, so it was never necessary to talk. A few months later, poets Howard Hart and Philip Lamantia came by my place with Jack. They decided to read their poetry with music. Jack said he would join in, reading, improvising, rapping with the audience, and singing along. Our first performance was in October of 1957 at the Brada Art Gallery on East 10th Street. It was the first jazz poetry reading in New York. There was no advertising and it was raining, but the place was packed. Jack had become the most important figure of our time. His name was Magic. In spite of all the carping, whining put-downs by the furious critics and the jealousy of some of his contemporaries for his overnight success, he had written 10 books in addition to On the Road with almost no recognition. Jack hadn't changed, but people's reaction to him was sometimes frightening. He was suddenly billed as being the king of the beatniks and manufactured against his will as some kind of a public guru for a movement that never existed. Jack was a private person, extremely shy and dedicated to writing. When he drank, he became much more expansive, and that was the only part of his personality that ever became publicized. The people who came to the Brada Gallery weren't taste makers. They were friends. A few months later, we began some readings at Circle in the Square. Everybody improvised, including the light man, who had his first chance to wail on the lighting board. The audience joined in heckling, requesting that Jack read parts of On the Road, joined in, and asked him to expand on anything that came into his head. He would also sing while I was playing the horn, sometimes making up verses. He had a phenomenal ear. It was like playing duets with a great musician. Jack was proud of his knowledge of music and the musicians of his time. He used to come by and play the piano by ear for hours at my place. He had some wonderful ideas for combining the spoken word with music. A few weeks later, jazz poetry became official entertainment, and a few months later was discarded as another bit of refuse added to the huge mound of our junk culture. It was harder to dispose of Jack. The same journalists and TV personalities who had heralded him were now ripping him to shreds. Fortunately, they couldn't rip up his manuscripts. His work is being published, more widely read and translated. Early 1958, all of us went to Brooklyn College, where Jack, Philip, and Howard read. Jack spent most of the time answering the students' questions with questions of his own. He was the down-home Zen master, and the students finally realized he wasn't putting them on, he was showing them himself. If they wanted to meet the author, Jack Kerouac, they would have to read his books. They were in the same state of mind, and his public appearances were never there to promote his books. They were there to share a state of mind and a way of being. The only journalist who picked up on this was Al Aronowitz. He saw Jack as an artist. In January of 1959, the film Pull My Daisy was made. Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Peter Orlovsky, Larry Rivers, and myself. The Third Avenue All-Stars, as one wit described us, appeared in it. Alfred Leslie directed it, and Robert Frank filmed it. Jack had written the scenario, and after the film had been edited, Jack saw it. Because it was a silent movie, Jack was to narrate it, and I was to write the music afterwards. He, Alan, and Neil Cassidy also wrote the lyrics for what became the title song, Pull My Daisy, for which I wrote the music and which was sung in the film by Anita Ellis. Jack put on earphones and asked me to play so that he could improvise the narration to music, the way we had done in all of our readings. He watched the film and made up the narration on the spot. He did it 2 times through spontaneously, and that was it. He refused to do it again. He believed in spontaneity. And the narration turned out to be the very best thing about the film. We recorded it at Jerry Newman's studio. Jerry was an old friend of Jack's from the early 1940s. And afterwards, we had a party jam session that lasted all night. Jack played the piano, sang, and improvised for hours. In the early 1960s, I used to see Jack when he would come in from Northport to visit town. Once he called up at 1 a.m. and told me I had to come over so that he could tell me a story. I brought over some music to copy, and Jack spoke nonstop until 8:30 a.m., describing he had made a trip he had made through North Africa and Europe. It was like hearing a whole book of his being read aloud. Jack was the best reader of his own work, with the exception of Dylan Thomas, that I've ever heard. That's a fantastic story, I said to Jack. Sounds just like your books. I try to make my writing sound just the way I talk, he said. His ideal was not to display his literary skill, but to have a conversation with the reader. I told Jack about the idea I had for a cantata about the 4 seasons in America using the works of American authors. He launched into a travelogue of his voyages around the country and referred to writers I might look into. I took notes and ended up reading nearly 50 books to find the texts. I included a passage from his book, Lonesome Traveler. The concert was at Town Hall in New York City, and Jack wrote that he couldn't come. It was the spring of 1965, and he didn't like being in New York. Sometimes he would call me from different parts of the country just to talk, and we continued to write one another. In one letter, he wrote, fame is such a drag. He wanted time to work, but found that success robbed him of his freedom. At the same time, he felt that he was forgotten. I told him that all the young people I met when I toured colleges loved his books. To many, he was their favorite writer, but writer meant something different now. It was what was being said, not how it was said. It was content that counted, not style. Jack's message was a whole way of being, and he became more and more of an influence than ever. Truman Capote dismissed Jack's work as typing. I never heard Jack put down another writer. He always went out of his way to encourage young writers. His work reflects this spirit of generosity, kindness, and love. That's why his typing is so meaningful to young people today. Jack was ahead of his time spiritually, like that of Charlie Parker, Lenny Bruce, and Lord Buckley. His work is constantly being rediscovered. Through knowing Jack, I wrote some of the best music I ever did. Without knowing him, I never would have written my first book, Vibrations, or this one. More important, young people all over the world are reading and rereading his work. His death only means the beginning of a new life for everyone who shares in the joy of knowing him through his books. 25 years later, after I wrote this, in October of 1994, I was invited as the featured performer at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. For the first time, a young writer, Attila Gaines, asked if he could reprint the old Evergreen Review Memorial Tribute and have me add to it and afterwards, 25 years later, almost to the day, to accompany the tribute that I had written in 1969 for Jack. He told me that he had ambivalent feelings about trying to make Jack into a cult figure or creating a mythology about the era. Most of us here at the festival and most of our readers were born after Jack died. Could you write a few paragraphs about what all this means today to go along with what you wrote 25 years ago? Here's what I gave Attila in October of 1994 for his spring 1995 of his magazine, Dharma Beat. And after I read this, we'll have our wonderful guests. 25 years after I wrote this, referring to the memorial piece from 1969, I was at Jack's memorial site in Lowell for the first time. David Orr, a lifelong friend of Jack's family from Lowell, and someone who reminded me of Jack in spirit and being, took me on a voyage to the Stations of the Cross, to Jack's grave, and the Kerouac Memorial, where I ran into Attila Gaines, co-editor of Dharma Beat. I liked the magazine because it felt to me to be connected to the feelings of what Jack was about and continued the broad, yay-saying, multifaceted, unsnobbish, communicative style that he would have enjoyed reading himself. After a beautiful few days in Lowell, I learned a whole new lesson about Jack and his life. Sitting in the living room of John Sampas and his gifted nephew, singer-songwriter Jim Sampas, both of whom are devoting endless hours to organizing and preserving Jack's work, I met many people who had also grown up with Jack and Lowell. All of these people are helping to paint the picture of where Jack came from and where his heart always was, in his hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts. It was the completion of a long journey. Being with others who truly loved Jack and created the festival Lowell Celebrates Kerouac was for me like going to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. I felt I had finally come home to a place I had always dreamed about and longed for. I could finally understand that Jack's physical passing was another continuing chapter in his Douloise legend, not the final one. That night, our group played our concert in his honor, and we felt that we were surrounded by his spirit. The final Sunday afternoon at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac was climaxed by a reading at a coffee house where I backed up 23 terrific area poets, just as I had backed up Jack in the 1950s. I went home and dug up the tribute to Jack I had written for an Evergreen Review 25 years before. Everything in it turned out to be true. It makes me happy that a quarter of a century later, the joy and inspiration Jack gave those of us lucky enough to be with him was now being shared all over the world by young people. Through his books, his unique and soulful journey has been immortalized. All the pain and sorrow, the beatnik myth, the jealous and embittered detractors are all part of the past. Through his glorious writings, Jack is a shining light to all of us in 1995, gives us all energy and inspiration. Merci, Jack. Now, in the new millennium, Jack's work has gained the recognition and appreciation that all of us prayed for and believed would be awarded to him someday. There's a new generation that's continuing this pursuit for artistic excellence and the creators of work to enable the spirit and the global society to be together. The children of the American pop night now have children and grandchildren of their own. Looking back at our era makes ensuing generations stronger and better informed than any of us ever were. We share our joy with them in knowing that the seeds we planted are flowering all over the world. And I thank you for being here. The next half of the book appropriately is called Book Two, and that has almost up until today of what I've had the pleasure of doing, of collaborating with Jack Spirit and the ideas that he shared with everyone that also came from the worlds of jazz and the visual arts and from the philosophy of the people who greeted us when we came over here on boats that we called Indians because Columbus thought that he had landed in India. However, the indigenous First Nation Native American people knew where they were from and somehow gave us a picture. They even have the Iroquois Constitution and so many of the other beautiful writings, the Seneca, are the basis of our own Constitution of what was already done and practiced thousands of years before we came here. And Jack appreciated and respected and knew about all of that. And because he understood that he also came from another place and was a visitor in this beautiful land to make his home, and that his and his family had a better life than they would have wherever we came from, he was humble enough to keep that to himself. And very briefly, our two guests, when I invited Joanne Shenandoah, who's such a wonderful singer, as you know, and a great person. Her husband, Doug George, is also a brilliant scholar, as well as a spokesman for Native American people. And since he's also a great scholar and knew of the 18th century, 17th, 18th century French visitors who came over in the Kerouac family, spelled with a K-I-R, not K-E-R, he said he would try to check the records out. And interestingly enough, one of our wonderful previous guests who was here that you might, I'm sure you'd remember, Maya Muller, her mother was partly Native American, which she didn't advertise. She was and was proud of that and let that be. She said, Jack wants to know about his roots that he feels. She said, I'm going to have him. And I told him, deal with that himself. And Doug George was kind enough to try to look up some of that information. But more to the point, since we all live here, and this is the year 2020, we're going to have some wonderful times with our very special guests who are here. And please let me have the pleasure of introducing to you a wonderful singer a wonderful mother, a great person, great friend, and someone whom I've known since I guess she was a teenager. And every time I'm with her and Doug, they take me to school. And now they're going to take us all to school. Please give a rousing ESP welcome. You don't have to clap because we're on cyberspace, whatever you call it, to the wonderful Joanne Shenandoah.
So, David, hi, how's it going? There appears to be some technical difficulties on Joanne's side. So Pamela and I, sorry to stop the show really quick, everybody. Kind of like, it's like Disneyland, right? A little bit right now. We're going to see David, if you could give her a call really quick and see if we can figure out like where she's at on her end, just because, Zoom's a little cantankerous.
Oh, okay. My only question to you would be, have you been in touch with her to explain to her which buttons to push?
Yes. So she should know that from rehearsal, and she was
Okay.
able to get on for rehearsal. So let's give her a call, Davy, and see if she's okay. Mm-hmm.
Hang on just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we call spontaneity in action. And if she's not available, I can tell you stories about her and Floyd Red Crow Westerman and myself and what we did. But frankly, it's much better to hear anything from a primary source. And she and Doug certainly are that. And we've been looking forward to this. So I just have to look at my phone book because it's an unlisted number, which I don't have memorized. And we will find out. And if she can't come, then we'll do something else. Actually, we can even have a discussion with the audience, which should be fun.
And I have a friend of mine is on, Peter Sterling. He's such a fan of Joanne, and he's a harpist, and he's nominated for a Grammy this year and loves Kerouac. Maybe he could play something for us.
Sure. But that'd be great. Let me just find Joanne's phone number because I wasn't expecting this. Just a moment, please. Let's see, that'd be under S. And I know it's here because I remember writing it down. Here we are. Hang on, folks. I don't want to say the number out loud because she gets swamped with phone calls. Okay.
This is actually all rehearsed. We wrote all of this as a live theater piece to perform for everyone.
Oh, okay.
So, James, I have a question for you.
Just one second. Hi, Joanne, it's David Amram. I was just giving you a fabulous introduction, but they told me that you were having trouble getting online or whatever you call it. Yeah.
I'm going to write a book one day about this this entire show, and I'm definitely going to have a great chapter during this episode. Thank you for everybody who has been tuning in every week. By the way, I have been noticing a lot of familiar people. Okay. Joyce, Hassan, Murray, of course, Dr. Harrison, Kelly. Yes. And that's everybody's faces that I see at the moment. So thank you, everybody.
What about James Canary?
He's a part of the show.
Okay.
Hi, Wiz.
Okay,
Two whizzes.
Terrific. Okay. She's at home.
Painting wizard and a scroll wizard.
I'm sorry. She's gonna be here in about 4 minutes. She was at home and she travels all over the world. I guess she was probably, at any rate, that's what makes life exciting. And fortunately, if you improvise as well as I always talk about the formality and informality, sometimes spontaneity makes what seems to be a disaster more interesting. So
That's what, David, that's what you and I were talking a little bit about the other day during our rehearsal call when you were telling stories about Del Close and times in Chicago that you had spent over there.
Yeah, well, that's because the jazz philosophy comes out from a larger philosophy, which is, first of all, improvising is akin to surviving. So that, for example, when since I just turned 90, they had concerts planned all over the world. Someone said, man, you had 15 major events, the biggest year in your life. What do you do with all this? Everything's down. I said, well, Miles Davis wrote a great song in 1959 called So What? Robert Frost, as an old man, said, I finally figured out what life's all about. It goes on. And the great jazz poet of the 18th century, Scotland's own our main man, Robert Burns, said, the best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. So that's what they call in the South. You just keep on trucking. So in improvising, there's a formal basis for that, which is knowing what you think you're going to do, who you're going to do it with, and if it's in the case of jazz, harmonies that you have to study all your life and tunes that you have to study. And then the parts where you don't know what you're doing, you sink and swim. And then the fact that other people are giving you a good collective feeling so that they can bail you out through some kind of ESP. But it's a combination of discipline and also hard work. And I mention that because our society deems improvisatory art, jazz, almost everything as being lesser, and therefore as a certified waste of time. You're either doing the Achtung, you Schwein, everything written down, which I also do and do religiously, but I try, as the great classical composers of the 17th and 18th century did, who were improvisers, to make it sound and feel natural. And what you feel is tempered by who you're with and what you do every minute of your life. So being able to improvise means that you make it up on the spot. So when people say, how can you do what we call freestyling? I said, I've been doing that all my life. When I asked Floyd Red Crow Westerman, who introduced me to Joanne, I said, Floyd, man, all the years I've known and played with you, then you made Dances with Wolves, became sort of like a almost movie star. And suddenly all people were coming up and saying, did you study with Uta Hagen? Did you study the method? Did you study? And Floyd said, I've been acting all my life. So the fact is that people spend fortunes or join cults or get gurus with limos or psychiatrists or dope dealers to tell them how to be real. And all that's there. We're born with that. You see little kids, 5 or 6, 7 years old, they can paint, draw, sing, make up songs, play games, dance, do everything. And then that improvising or that natural approach is more or less beaten out of us. And conversely, people that can't really do much of anything, their philosophy is, well, jazz is too complicated, painting's too hard, writing's too hard. So I'm going to be an avant-garde artist at whatever, as they say in The Sopranos, just drop some acid. Yeah, like whatever. Well, that's fine too, but that's a different thing. The really beautiful improvising is a part and parcel and the same coin as the other side of the coin, which is sitting back there as Charlie Parker did and practicing 14 hours a day till anything that came into his mind, he could play. And composers like Mozart, who already had it in their head and they were taking dictation from themselves and could write it out. And all of that relates to all of us that live in this culture, which is basically American Indian land, for which we're grateful. I hope, I'm sure we are, or I know we are, to be in this beautiful place, but to understand that there's something here that we don't understand, that we never will understand, but we can learn from those who have lived here 50,000 years and benefit, not by pretending to be Indians, but by appreciating as boat people, number one, the people who greeted everyone with hospitality, and number two, try to be hospitable to other people and to check out our own families and our own heritages. Jack Kerouac was very much into that in terms of trying to find his original French identity and his Canadian identity and his American identity. And that's the beautiful thing in his books, that he describes himself as kind of an outsider. And then when you realize that we're all outsiders, then we're cool because we know our identity, which is a work in progress in this amazing.
And that is a perfect segue to bring in Joanne, who is just joined us. Joanne Shenandoah, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Joanne. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I've had a really long day, and I apologize for not joining sooner. But I say thank you for having me on the show, David. You're one of my heroes. You're my absolute, one of my dearest friends, and I love you to pieces. And so, yeah, let's talk.
Well, I can ask you a question, Joanne. That's always a good way. And then I can be mercifully brief and listen. I remember we met at the Washington Monument, and the band didn't outnumber the audience. I think there was 9 people there, and there was you, Floyd Westerman, myself, and someone else I can't remember. But I know since then you've traveled all over the world, and maybe you could tell us something from the beginning of the story I loved, and that beautiful Skywalker record, the one you made of your dad working, how there was a Native American community in Brooklyn of steel workers, and just start from there. Then you just go ahead and I'll listen. We'll all listen.
Well, I am thrilled to have known you, David, for so long. And when I first met David, Floyd Red Crow Westerman said, "This is a dear friend of mine," and I was like, "Any dear friend of Dave or of Floyd would be a friend of mine too," because he was just an amazing person. And you know, we have traveled the world. I've been very fortunate to tell stories and songs from Australia to Korea to South Africa with the likes of Nelson Mandela, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Mikhail Gorbachev on the board of Green Cross now, which is really exciting, and singing songs about the earth. And you know, on this particular song that you mentioned, David, is the Mohawks and the Iroquois people in general have always been known for their ability to walk high steel and not afraid of heights. Neither am I, actually, which is very amazing because we see in New York City the influx of the work that has been done from the World Trade Center on down. And anyhow, I was blessed to have a dad who was a chief and a mom who's a clan mother. And the clan mothers are responsible for the political, social, and spiritual welfare of the people. And this is my grandson making the noise behind me. Anyway, he's 2 years old. And anyhow, they were very, very proud of their heritage and told me to be the same. So coming from a long line of Iroquois leaders, he wants to say hello, evidently.
Oh, let's say hello to Ryder. Ryder would love to say hello to you. Where are you?
Right here. Say hi.
We can hear you. Now we can see you. Hello, Ryder. How are you doing?
Say hi. Hi.
Hi.
So, I've always, never went for obviously fame, but certainly I've been very blessed to be able to write songs that tell our history, songs that kind of inspire people. Toys. He wants toys. Okay, all right. And Doug is joining us as well.
Toys. Hello, Doug.
This is Doug. Hi. And anyhow, this is the David flew in and was on my first recordings, and I was so happy about that because he's so talented and so amazing. And I've just been very, very blessed to have David in my life and his musical inspiration. And, you know, his stories are, of course, amazing. He always has something wonderful and interesting to say. And there are people that all over the globe who love his work. So I feel very fortunate to know and love David.
Could I say one thing, Joanne, too? First of all, I saw Doug George there. Doug, it's great to see you and to see your beautiful grandson. And for those viewers who might be brought up to think, why is that child not behaving properly? With all
He's
due
a night
respect,
owl.
I did a concert with Floyd Red Crow Westerman, and in the middle of it, we were just in a real beautiful, kind of sensitive, quiet part, and suddenly we heard, and a lot of people looked real shocked. And Floyd said, "No," he said, "that is beautiful." He said, "That baby crying," he said, "that's the sound of life." He said, "We love that. That's part of what we do and why I'm here, because we're celebrating life and the new people coming." So we're glad to see you and your husband and your grandson. And that gives everybody who's listening, try to bring your kids to something beautiful. And that is all we really need. And it's just great to see you guys, and thank you for coming. I know you and Doug have done such amazing work, and somehow we're able to bring the idea of people being together. Maybe you and Doug could talk about that, because we're the divisiveness that we see, that's been going on for a long time. And you said the best answer of all when you were speaking to us a few days ago, and you said, "We're still here." That
Yes.
says it all.
Well, from the beginning of our confederation in the birthplace of democracy, which is amongst the Iroquois and in what is now upstate New York, our prime directive has always been to promote reconciliation among people, healing, the removal of war as a means of resolving disputes, how to live in peace and harmony with the natural world. And so what our leaders did, instead of devoting their intellect towards developing machines, we pursued spirituality and political consciousness and ecological sanity. And we've been trying to persuade the world that, in fact, there is an alternative to the current situation. And what we've been doing, Joanne and I, is asking the various peoples of the world, the nations, to amend their governments, their constitutions to include the earth as having the same legal standing as human beings. Remember that notorious Supreme Court ruling that gave corporations the same rights as people. And so what we're asking is to expand that and include Mother Earth in all of her elements and manifestations as having actual legal rights. And last year, there was a group of people in Toledo, Ohio, younger people, who persuaded the city council to give Lake Erie legal standing. And so it removes it from being a commodity to actually being something that is a living, conscious entity. I think if we can begin by that, adopting an ancient Iroquois principle of the earth and all of the species that depend upon her as being equal in stature as human beings, then we can reverse a lot of these tendencies to treat her as a lifeless entity, a lifeless commodity. And that's what we've been doing. And reception is coming along. People are responding to it. Mikhail Gorbachev adopted one of our cardinal rules, the seventh generation. So David was referring to Floyd and the sound of children and what that does for us spiritually and physically when we hear that child's laughter. And so we asked Mikhail Gorbachev if he would accept this teaching of seventh generation, which means that all we do has to be done in consideration for the unqualified right of the seventh generation to life and to have clean air and clean water and all the things they need to be happy upon this earth. And we can extend our consciousness to include the seventh generation and say that they have inalienable rights. That would, I think, result in a dramatic transformation of this planet. So we haven't given up. We're still here. We're watching the earth as she changes and reacts to human excesses. But she is responsive. And Dave Amram, of all the people that we've known, has managed to master one of the ways of communicating with the earth, and that is through music. That's what he's brought to us. Nothing happens in this world without music, whether it's the birth of the planet or the transformation from this world to the next. It's all done to music. And Dave is absolute gift to all of us in that he brings that goodness to us. And believe me, the other species will respond to what Dave
Yes, that's for sure.
Well, it's amazing because I remember, Doug, 40 years ago, when I came with Floyd Westerman, Max Gale had us come up there and we were doing a little concert for the Freedom School, which was in Akwesasne. And afterwards, I had such a wonderful time. And even though there were two rival groups, and one of the rival groups had guns on us, and we were going across the border, I said, "Whoa!" Still, all the people, after going through what they did, all snuck off into town and played a lacrosse game, beat some other group, and then came back. And after the concert was over, Joanne gave me a beautiful rattle, which I played for 40 years. And recently, I was playing, and I had the remains of the rattle because some person was such a big fan of it, they kept stealing parts of it and everything. And I was shaking a little bit that was left, and I said, "This is the remains of a beautiful rattle." I went into all that. And sure enough, she said, "Well, I'm a friend of Tom Porter, who was one of the people that was there." And he said, "I'll get Tom to get you a rattle." So here it is. And I always wanted to thank Joanne for the second generation rattle. So every time now when I mentioned your name, I can mention Tom's and Doug's too. And just as a thank you. And I say that, first of all, not only to honor you, but for everybody watching, stay with old friends as well as making new ones, and treasure your family, your children, your parents, and your friends and your old friends, because that's priceless.
Yeah.
And that's free. So our society says, well, anything that's free is worthless. No, excuse me, it's priceless. And both of you coming on and doing this there's no way we could thank you except to hope that people will listen and go on and look and see Joanne's records and read some of your books, and more, get their children to try to see if we can get a better education so that they can learn without having, they could even put that in a history book after 500-600 years, 1,000 years, whatever. It's not a bad idea, since we're living here, to have some picture of where we're living. I don't think that's a radical idea. That's just common sense. And you guys are both doing that every minute.
David, I'd love to mention, for those who don't know about the rattle, the Iroquois rattle, inside normally we put some sort of seeds, because they say that when we play the rattle, all elements of the earth are going to listen. Every entity that's alive, all the animals are going to hear, and our ancestors, and everyone will come to attention to celebrate life, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I just want to thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. So So Dave, now that you awakened a turtle, what are you going to do with it?
Well, I would say it's just supposed to make us all feel alive too, because I know one of the legends is how the whole earth was created on the back of a turtle.
Yes.
And
That's
maybe you could speak about that, because you're qualified and we're
13
all good listeners.
Oh yeah,
lunar cycles and
on the back of the turtle. If you look at the back of the North American turtles, whether it's the snapper or the mud turtle, they all have those 13 different sections to it. It represents the 13 phases of a lunar year of our grandmother and our grandmother moon. And the way that began, of course, is when people ask us, well, who do you think you are, Iroquois, Mohawks? I always say we're star people. And we were brought here to walk about the earth, to plant seeds, to celebrate. And the Creator gave us all that we need in order to live a good life, a happy life. And when we're done and our physical body is put back into the embrace of Mother Earth, then our spirit goes on. Goes on to the spirit world, where we'll join our ancestors. But our duty is to act as gardeners, as cultivators, as planters, as healers. And when the Sky Woman came from the cluster of stars we call the Pleiades, or it's called the Pleiades in English, that's what she brought with her, this spirit, this first human consciousness. And people ask us, well, don't you believe that we are descended from primates? And our Iroquois answer is no, that consciousness came from stars, and that the Creator created our physical being out of the earth. So we resemble primates, but that thing that keeps us distinct came from the stars. And it was upon the back of a turtle that North America was created. And if you look at North America from 200, 300 miles in space, you see it resembles a great snapping turtle. And that's where we built our societies, and the imagery is there. It pervades through everything that we do. And there's nothing that we do without music and song. And that's what Dave brought to us. Here's this guy, and I assume your ancestors are Ashkenazi, and they came from times of great troubles and challenges, and came here and found refuge, because that's what our Iroquois people did. They embraced others, and he communicated with us, not necessarily
Bless you.
through English or spoken word, but through music. That's again how we do everything. And the earth itself has a musical tone to it, and all the planets do, and they're just now using contemporary science to affirm this. But we've always known that. If you sing to the earth, if you sing to seeds, if you sing to trees, they react. They all have their consciousness. And again, that's one of our fundamental teachings. And the Freedom School did and has an amazing curriculum that you can find online, the Opposition Freedom School, that can be applied to any people anywhere on this planet. And it moves in a cycle. So everything is connected, math, contemporary affairs, reading,
Science.
writing, science, art, all of them flow within this circle. And in essence, what it means is everything we do, whether it's a child solving a problem involving physics, or whether they're taking painting, it all comes to the same thing: creativity, harmony, and gratitude, and humility. So that's the essence of what we teach.
And before all things are done, every day or every ceremony is always about gratitude, thanksgiving for all the earth elements. So it's the birds who still sing, the stars still shine. You know, the sun comes up every morning. So we all have our responsibilities, irrespective of who we are, what entity we are. So we need to follow our own innate creator-given gifts. And if we do that, then the world becomes a better place, which is a beautiful concept. And so when we think of those things, we do it with a good mind, we don't do it for fame or fortune or for money or for, any other reason other than gratitude, because gratitude is everything. If we're thankful, we are very blessed. We feel very, very uh, honored to be able to still have the earth elements that continue to give to us. Like Mother Earth, she's about 75% water, and so are we. So we resonate because she gives to us. We continue to give life. We continue to be who we are. And during this time where a lot of people are living in fear, there's a lot of pills for fear, right? And so we have to think about those things as well, because when we come together as a community, or even in this time frame that we live in right now, with the pandemic, we think on being full of gratitude that we are still here, that we still have good water to drink, that we have good food to eat. And we hope and pray that we will continue to do those things for 7 generations into the future. And every generation after that thinks for the next 7 generations. So that's where that comes from. It's an Iroquois, Iroquois concept. So.
Yeah, you remember the story, Dave, that Pete Seeger would tell about when he met the Mohawk in the 1950s?
Oh, yeah.
And Spirit was almost crushed by the U.S. government that tried to silence him because he was advocating distribution of the country's resources. They call it communism. But they were really hard on him. And they marginalized him. They hurt him in very, very direct ways. And he said, by chance, because his heart was in the ground, that he found himself in the Northern Adirondacks. And in the Northern Adirondacks, again by chance, some would say, he met one of our great teachers, Ray Fadden. And Ray Fadden had spent his career as a teacher promoting and restoring and reviving the Mohawk traditional customs at the great anger and wrath of the Catholic Church and other institutions. But Ray persisted, and he met Pete Seeger. He said to us that that time he met with Ray was enough to lift his spirits and realize that there was something beyond human issues on this planet, and that there was a whole world to think of and sing for and be happy for. And he said his whole life changed after that one meeting with Ray Fadden. And one of the last things he did was to do the blessing of the waters. And he would take that rattle and he would sing to the Hudson River.
Right.
I think that was one of his last public performances before he went.
And Joanne and I played with him for that. And
he embraced that.
You know what he said to me, Doug? He said, he said, for all my friends who came over on boats as well, he said, my forebearers came over on the Mayflower. That also made a blast of shock waves from people who fancied themselves as being nouveau arrivistes. I mean, you just lately, so therefore you ain't as cool because you've only been here, whatever. He said they came over in the Mayflower. He said, no one asked my forebearers, where are you from? What did your parents do? How much money did you make? Where is your passport? How do you pray? They were just welcomed. Then they went through that first winter. They were showing them how to plant crops and how to survive in this new place. Then he said, what we did in exchange was disgraceful. But this is the part that blew everybody's mind. He said, feeling guilty about that is a waste of time and a self-indulgence. Trying to say thank you. Yes. If you can do something in your life to equal that hospitality and civilized behavior that was shown towards us, if you can do that to other folks who are coming here for the first time now and share that hospitality with them and honor your parents and grandparents over the scuffles they went through to even get over here, he said, then you could be doing something valuable. So it was really wonderful the way he turned that around from being a political us versus them, but rather us, period. And somehow we all had to get along and to finally appreciate where we were and what the history was and go from there to see if we could do That's a really hard message to get across because people either want one or the other. And Pete used to say, for the bird to fly successfully, the left and right wing must find some way to work in harmony. So heavens help anybody who wants to bring people together, but that's the real deal. And that's where people can look back and study, you know, your history, not just then, but right now, and see the amazing thing, how that could be an inspiration to everybody to clean up our act.
Yes, it can. Yes, again, and we're still here, like you said, and still willing to do what we can to embrace people, to welcome them to this Turtle Island. And I say that all the time when I do a lecture. I say, welcome to Turtle Island. And on behalf of our Mohawk people, you know, we embrace you with our best words, and our best words are greetings and well-being. And may you be at peace. And I was just speaking to some people from Pakistan who are refugees in Canada, and they say the same thing almost that we do. Is it Salam alaikum?
Yeah.
Peace be with you. And I said, hey, isn't that remarkable? We say the same thing. Sego stanako. Peace be with you.
See, Jack Kerouac, when he went on that famous show, they said, he's a big Republican and he goes to church and loves his mother, is patriotic, so he's a right-wing fascist. We don't want to deal with him. He lost a lot of his fan club. The part of the program they forget is that he said, I'm not for the war or for anything. He said, I think this whole war, I think the North and Vietnamese are all cousins. He said, this is about selling Jeeps, and we're doing a good job of it. And they never put that part in the program because he saw, I think, a larger picture. Which was, it shouldn't be us versus them or them versus us. We just have to find a way to be together. And that's why his books are beautiful. And that's why he was so interested in trying to discover any possible roots that he had from Native background from way back. And when we did the Orizaba 210 Blues, a recording of that, he was in Mexico and he felt he could, not understanding the language, he could feel something. And he said, I don't know what it is. And he never said that publicly, but it was one of the things he was searching for. And I think that now at the point, I remember Floyd Westerman said to me one time, I said, Floyd, we were doing some crazy benefit before Floyd got that famous and you with hardly anybody showing up and had all the sort of psychotics. I said, Floyd, how are you going to ever get to move along when so many non-Indian people are such nutcases that they can't even figure out how to tie their shoe? How are they going to be helpful? And he said, quote, he said, Dave, we can't afford to be choosy. We need all the help we can get from anyone. And then I realized, I was mistaken. I had no right to cast judgment on anybody that wanted to do something that would seem to be good. And that by thinking that way, I was as big a part of the problem as the worst, someone who was right of Attila the Hun, because I was doing the same thing myself. And I learned from Floyd to get past that and understand we got to be together. So your gig, our gig, all boat people's gig is try to convince our family and our good friends, maybe if they don't read one of your books or don't read Vine Deloria's book or they don't read I Have Spoken, 400 Years of American History that Native American people speaking, which they used to write down on not the Native folks, but the people that had the court reporters could write stuff down. Boy, you see some of the most incredible Chief Seattle's speech that was taught in schools. He just rapped that out.
Yeah.
What you do, spontaneous prose and improvising, as we call it, that's got a heck of a background from the Native American culture, but it didn't even have a name. That was just the way it was. And that's a beautiful thing for us to study and teach our kids and appreciate.
Yeah, Dave, I was trying to trace the origins of that well-known Native phrase, as long as the sun shines and the grass grows and the waters flow. And you see it in my favorite Indian movie, Little Big Man. And so I traced that, and it comes from the Confederacy, the very birth of the Confederacy, when the peacemakers told us, as long as the sun shines and the moon rises, this thing that we have done will endure. It'll survive. And what Kerouac was doing was trying to reach some kind of appreciation for the world in which he found himself to be in. And he knew it was you couldn't find it in institutions, but it had to be something that was genetic in his DNA. And so with your help, I contacted his brother and we traced some of his ancestry to a Baptiste family in Quebec along the St. Lawrence. And that could have been the native ancestor that he was looking for. Because in our community, we used to have families of Baptiste. And amongst the Abenakis in Odanak, northwest or northeast of Montreal, they still have that family, Baptiste. So it's, there's a strong possibility, since he was French Canadian, most French Canadians had, including the current Prime Minister Trudeau, you have Native ancestry. So I think he was right on when he was searching for that.
And during his time, it was very hard to even think, because most of the folks I knew from Canada, not what they called the Métis, which was an official understanding of people being together from different cultures, but people that weren't listed, really, if they did know that their grandmother or great-grandmother was Native or something, they wouldn't talk about that. And I found that in many different parts of the culture here in the USA, especially since I'm 90, when I was a teenager, people that would do that kind of try to keep that part secret. And in Mexico, good Lord, everybody said Spanish royalty or part. No one until recently ever said, when Chavez, the great composer, wrote Sinfonia Indio, and that was a shocking thing. He was already in his 60s or 70s, and he finally wrote a symphony based on some of the music that he grew up with. It was a killer piece. People were shocked because they wanted him to be more like an Austrian count. And when I was in Egypt, Rahim, who's like the Aaron Copland of Japan, I had a beautiful rattle that I had brought, a tambourine. I was playing the drum. I had all these great things. And his wife had found a conservatory of Cairo, and boy, they were killer musicians. We were in the train station, so I started playing something. He started shaking the tambourine and getting down. His wife slapped him. And I realized she was slapping him because she worked her whole life trying to make him seem as un-Egyptian as possible so they could show, we can do that European stuff too. And I could see that as great as she was as an educator, she was brainwashed with all that colonial attitude that affects everybody. So part of the good thing, I think, we can learn something of your history is we can make that able to understand our history and decolonize ourselves.
Yes.
Not hate the colonial people, but take that colonization that was dumped upon us, which we don't even know, and say, okay, maybe that's a good way to brainwash everybody into cutting off their hair, cutting off their religion, stopping their dancing, and making them a third-rate English citizens or English lords, which they're not, but rather just to be themselves and realize every person is here, comes from a sacred tradition that all ethnicities, Floyd Westerman told me, Dave, ethnic is a code word for subhuman. I never thought of that. I said, wow, we could forget about all that stuff and just see that each person has something special. And that's to be studied as a soul-to-soul relationship. And you're never going to understand it, but at least you know it's there. And if it's beyond understanding, that's cool too. Then you can just revere it.
Yeah. Well, Dave, it took you, your generation, and your contemporary like Peter Lafarge.
Oh, wasn't he something?
Incredible music. And you can change from being ashamed and embarrassed about being Native to being proud of your heritage, to what Peter and you guys did in Greenwich Village in the early 60s. Peter Lafarge with that amazing repertoire he had, Cash taking Peter's music and making it to that album, Bitter Tears. That's when the change begins. When that music happens and Peter addresses these very controversial issues, extremely tender, and then he elevated all of us from that. And that was, you guys were there. You were in.
That song, Drums, I remember that. Such a beautiful. I know you do that too, Joanne. I think, don't you? Sometimes, do you ever do that one?
Yeah.
I thought you'd done that, but Floyd. I know Floyd sang that. Oh my Lord, Man, talk about getting moved. That you know somebody 50 years and you still want to cry every time you hear them do it. That song was so I never realized,
Yeah.
Peter somehow he intuited that and he wrote that in the song Ira Hayes, that song. Incredible. Those are recent things. That's some incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing to us that that's there.
Yeah.
And your songs, Joanne, you didn't even talk about that. Boy, some of your songs, well,
And now finally,
everybody feels that hears them all over the world. So you don't need my praise, but they sure are beautiful.
finally now people are starting, and Hollywood, I should say, is starting to recognize the fact that there are many stories that have not been told. So we're getting a lot of phone calls and emails regarding, films that are going to be coming out. Leonardo DiCaprio is doing one with music from Robbie Robertson, who I've also worked with, which is really phenomenal. And I'm really happy that the Jim Thorpe movie will be coming out. There's just a lot of things that are happening now where people are going to realize the roots of our country, indigenous ways, and the contributions that we've made. Like people like Ray Fadden, like Doug said, are finally going to be recognized for their contributions, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that ever that you're ahead of your time. You're right on time. Everybody's been right on time. And sometimes I always tell people when they say, well, you have to wait all these decades. I said, man, Moses was in the desert for 40 years. So I'm right on schedule. And if it's true, it stays true. It stays beautiful.
Yeah. That's true.
And that's
hello. I had a question for the little boy, and I was being so patient, and I waited, and I think it's too late. So it's my time now. I want to say hello from the Bear Nation, and maybe another time I could play with Ryder, and next time I won't be so patient letting big people do their stuff, because I want to play. So let him know.
All right.
I will. I will. I think he's finally laying down.
Yeah,
Yes.
he does his wolf howls and his bear growls.
And his dinosaur.
Sure that bear doesn't fall off the bridge.
Right. I thought I better not bring the bear out when he was there, because can't get enough of the Bear Nation.
Yeah, exactly.
Joanne, do you think maybe, or Pamela, maybe some people would want to ask Joanne and Doug a question?
That would be great. I know my friend Peter Sterling is on. He's also Grammy nominated this year. He plays the harp, and he loves your music and listens to it all the time. Like me, I listen to it all day long. Peter, are you there? Are you on yet?
I see Kelly. And
Peter Sterling, it looks like.
Yes. Does anyone else have a question currently?
Robert Niles is there with his, I don't know if that's a Gibson or a Martin guitar next to him.
I have a question, actually, if you don't mind, about the bringing of the nations together. So, we have, the world nations, and yet, how do you feel about the bringing together of all of the First Nations, and with all your different origination stories, and how have you found the harmony through your music with all of the nations?
Well,
Well, what the Confederacy did, it was invented and developed by Skanalahawi, the peacemaker, with that idea in mind, that he would help create, not coerce, a political, spiritual, ecological entity in which all people had equal voice. There was equality amongst the genders, but it would be democratically based upon free will, logic, and rationality. And they would come together of common purpose, and they would create this great league. And in fact, he accomplished that. So true democracy started amongst our Iroquois people, and we formed a United Nations, and that inspired people in the 20th century to do likewise. But their failures were failures of omission. They did not include the rights of the natural world, and they did not include equality amongst genders. And they also came out of a history of institutionalization where things like religion and economics were controlled by a certain caste of people. One of the great admirers of the Iroquois was Karl Marx. And at the conclusion of his life, he was writing his great epic in which he was going to describe the Iroquois as one of the greatest accomplishments of human intellect. And his personal correspondence and his notes based upon his reading of Lewis Henry Morgan and others showed that he was just absolutely enamored of us. And so we take credit for not only inventing democracy in its truest sense, but also communism. And Carl Jung was another fan of the Iroquois. We met his daughter when we were in Switzerland. And he developed his whole thing about group consciousness and dream therapy, and based upon his study of Lewis Henry Morgan, the origin of the family, and the Iroquois. So the women's suffragette movement also is heavily influenced by the Iroquois. So in subtle ways, we have done exactly what you said. We've used our thinking in order to influence the world. Now we have to take it to the next one. And,
but things are starting to change because we have also been asked to be in a committee to bring in a bronze statue of an Iroquois woman to the Seneca Falls Women's Hall of Fame, right? The park there. And our committee got together and we talked about a woman who made serious change. And she was a relative named Laura Cornelius Kellogg. And so this is a very beautiful thing that we can incorporate now, the fact that women have always had some level of amazing influence to our democracy. And for example, it was the women who would decide who would the leaders be, right? And also take them out of office. One thing about unity that I've found very beautiful in going from Africa to Australia to people who are native here in this country is I went to visit some of the traditional Cherokee ladies, and she told me, or this one woman told me, she says, we used to gather together to just talk about things. It wasn't all about war. It was about, we'd bring a piece of our earth from our territory. We'd all place it in a mound. The mound began to grow and grow and grow, which is a beautiful concept. All of our earth comes together as one. So as connected as we are to each other, we're connected to our Mother Earth, which is so beautiful. I think that's just amazing. And also when I went to visit the people out in Oregon, they asked for permission to come to shore with the salmon, which is so beautiful, singing a song, which is a wonderful, wonderful concept. Like, how could you refuse a song? Remember when we used to go around caroling? I mean, I do. I remember that, going house to house just to sing. I mean, how beautiful is that? We don't do that anymore. I mean, obviously not now in this time, but there are some traditions that have fallen by the wayside, which we need to think about and respect and reserve for our children so that they know about these traditions and this beautiful songs that we sing to one another. Even our peacemaker, when Hiawatha was so grieved by the loss of his daughters to an evil chief named Kadadaho, he came singing a song and he wanted to forgive Kadadaho for this evil act. I'm thinking, oh, how beautiful is that? I mean, how more genuine can you possibly be than just offering up a song to someone? It's like when you're a little baby, that's what they love. They love the vibration of music. They love the singing. And that's my grandson. I've been singing to him for 2 years now. and he's singing right in tune, right with me now. And it's so beautiful because you see that that song and that music is just so vibrationally beautiful because it comes from the heart.
Mm.
One of our leaders, Mohawk, that passed on, had this idea during Desert Storm in the early 90s that instead of bombing Saddam Hussein, what happens if we get all spiritual people and we approached him with music, and then we could change his thinking by the power of music. That's what the Peacemaker taught us, that no human being is beyond redemption if you have the power of music.
May I ask you a question about the ancestors? Because we hear a lot about the land and we understand about the invasion that happened starting east, going across the country. How do the First Nations handle this question of the ancestors being displaced from their own land, and how do they maintain that communication maybe from other land? Did it have to integrate a new story for that, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'd like to say that I was on 60 Minutes with Morley Safer.
Mm-hmm.
He was sitting in my living room, and we live in a home that's 100, or how many years? 200 years old, where Chief Shenandoah lived and died at the age of 110. So it's an amazing property. But he was talking, why is the land so sacred? Why is it that you say that? And I said, because our ancestors are buried here side by side. It doesn't matter what race, religion, culture, age. We are rooted into this land. We're side by side. So that's why this land is sacred, because we worship the fact that we have been given this gift of life. And also we have this responsibility to understand one another and to work together so that we can live in harmony and balance with each other in the natural world. And he started crying. It was so beautiful. I mean, I think he was in shock because he never thought of it that way.
If you want to have a tangible working relationship, it has to be based upon truth and, as they say in Canada, reconciliation with our collective histories. We acknowledge that great harm was done, but we have to have the means to heal and to put aside those times of troubles to learn from them. But reconciliation, we do have the rituals to do just that. And they're again based upon music. And that's the key to reaching out to people who might be of different thinking. And so in Canada, at least amongst the First Nations, there is a move towards embracing new technologies, new ideas, and then blending that with our traditional values. And you'll see that, for instance, where I come from, Mount Samoans, that we have probably more than any other Native people have used contemporary means of communication in order to share our ideas and to make sure the doors of our longhouse are open to whoever wants to embrace this new way of living. And again, it's a constitutional amendment. If we can get somebody within the U.S. Congress or a leader to say that, to do what they've done in Peru and Ecuador, and that is to say that we need this constitutional amendment to recognize the natural rights of the earth. I think that's the beginning you're looking for.
Well, I remember in Canada, I did one with the Toronto Symphony. We had Winston Watney, who I'm sure you remember. He's not as old as me, but he's moving on up with the old speedometer. And this was 1969, and we did a concert, and we did Mastinchila Wachipe Olwan, the one I did with you, Joanne, so many years ago, and we've done together hundreds of times, and Floyd did. Anyway, we did that traditional one, and then we did a piece by a wonderful Lewis Ballard, a Native American composer who
Oh,
written
yeah, I knew him. Yeah.
scenes from Indian life, which the Toronto Symphony had never done. And the people in the symphony, all the years after that, said, "We remember you for one thing. When you did that concert and that guy, Winston Watson, came, and when he walked off the stage, instead of smiling for the others, he took his drum and he played his drum and he played the drum for us and he walked off the stage slowly looking at us, acknowledging us. He said that never happened in our careers with the symphony, but he realized actually we were the ones making the music and he was there to celebrate the music, not anything else. And he gave us that something that we all remembered and made us feel that we were part of something, which everyone is, but they have to learn to turn those feelings off because of the political nature of the symphony orchestra, where the conductor is everything and you're just a typewriter key. So therefore, he brought everybody back to life just in that little moment by reminding them of how beautiful they were, because him being able to acknowledge that. And also Wilma Mankiller, when she came with the St. John the Divine, we did a program and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad to see all of you people from New York City attending this event." She said, "Now seeing me, since I'm the leader, you're seeing Wilma Mankiller, you're seeing what a real Indian chief looks like." everybody freaked out. And we started off the program. The people again said, "Well, Mr. Amram, what are you going to do? Are you going to improvise?" I said, no. I said, "You have Carlos Nakai here, who's a magic. He'll start off and play whatever is in his heart. Someone will come and say a prayer, or a lions will say a prayer, and then it'll just go naturally." She said, "How can you do that?" I said, "I can't do that, but the Native American people have been doing that for thousands of years, and I don't think anyone's ever asked for a refund. So it'll just happen because everybody will know what to do." And that's what did happen. I wanted to mention that because that, in relationship to improvising that we talked about before you and Doug were able to come, and with Jack Kerouac's work of trying to celebrate the spirit of this place and the unknown and respect, sharing, all that good stuff. It all kind of relates. And that's so wonderful that you and Doug were able to come here. Now, does anybody in the audience, assuming obviously I forgot there was an audience, but if anybody in the audience, there's someone.
Peter's on. Wait, Norton's waving. Norton. Hi, Norton. Your mic is off once again.
Norton is the great artist, and he's also our silent partner because he's, like myself, is limited technologically.
Wow.
There you go.
Very beautiful.
We can't hear you, Norton. Can you speak louder?
Hear me?
Now we can.
Hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with Russell Means, and in those one of the events was he was giving a talk at the Southwest Museum, like in Highland Park, and I drove him there, and when we walked in, he saw all the bones and skeletons of the Indians that had been collected and put in cases. So I just have to share what it was like being with Russell and him trying to give a talk after this awakening of things that were, you know what I mean, that would probably at best try to keep in the bottle. Anyway, it was about as powerful as a thing that I've ever gone through in my life, is spending that time with him as he tried to communicate to these women and these interested people what they had in their cages, in their boxes. Anyway, that's enough. So that I didn't mean to bring everybody way down, but it's an important part of the story, I think.
Well, I could just say briefly, when I was in Nicaragua for the U.S. State Department, as their $50 a day ambassador of goodwill, because they couldn't get anybody to conduct the symphony and go out to the jam session, speak Spanish, and hang out with everybody for that kind of money. So even though I was not what they expected, they put up with me and let me alone because they figured, well, he's so cheap, it doesn't matter if he gets kidnapped. And I was invited by someone in the orchestra that said, look, we don't know if you're a CIA agent or what, but you seemed like a nice cat and you played with Tito Puente and got all those beads and stuff on. I want to take you to where my dad lives. He's in Masaya, which is still old traditional Indian country in Nicaragua. I said, no kidding. He said, yes, we have a 200-year, 300-year-old ceremony in Toltec. He said, the State Department says nobody speaks Toltec anymore. Fortunately, all the people that live there don't read the State Department's brochure. So I went and sure enough, had this amazing pageant that was like incredible. They were rehearsing. Then they said, we want to take you to our museum. I went to the museum that was sort of what you described. There was all glass. Only thing, it was run by the Indians in Masaya, not by a rent-a-cop hired from New York City or Los Angeles, but actually Indian people. 5:01, they closed the door. They opened up all the boxes of flutes and everybody started playing them. I said, wow. They said, no, we just had them under glass so they don't get stolen by tourists. They said, those instruments want to get played. And we always say, if you have a flute and you can't play it, that means you're not supposed to give it to someone who can play it because they want to have their voice heard. I said, wow. And sure enough, they took all those instruments out and played for about 3 or 4 hours. Then they put everything under the glass until the next closing night. And that was the difference between lifetime a triple life sentence incarceration in the museum with a bottle of formaldehyde with some information and dripped out, and someone with a club in case you got too close to the treasures, and a real museum, which was just celebrating the spirit of that culture, those paintings, that music. So I think what Joanne does when she comes out and plays everything for the heads of state in different countries and here to playing when we play little tiny places and different things we've been to, it's all about the spirit. And each time is sacred, each time is beautiful, each time is for real, and each time is meaningful. And just so wonderful, Joanne, you could come on and just say a tiny bit. And I wish they had the technology so we could play, but people could go online. That's a computer, folks. I learned about that as an older person myself. And you can go on and look up Joanne Shenandoah. And if you can't spell it, go on Google and search for Shenandoah and you'll find the correct spelling. It's even a town in Pennsylvania named after that. If you're not familiar with the Native American leader or Joanne, who's from that family, or you've never heard of Oneida, go on the computer. Google.com University will help you out. And you can go and see and hear some of her fantastic, beautiful songs and music that she's done. And you can see things that Doug George has done, which are so vast that would fill up 15 shows and a whole library shelf. And get yourself some education. And then it's not a federal crime to share that for free with your friends because you'll learn something. And that's what we're all here to do, to make a contribution. So
Davey, I'd like to ask Joanne if she's feeling playing something for us and singing for us.
I was gonna offer to sing you a song. I don't know what the lighting is like here because we're at an Airbnb at the moment in disarray with all kinds of renovations. Anyway, that said, I'd like to share with you a song, but I want to mention Shenandoah because David mentioned that. The original name was pronounced Shenandoah, which means the deer. It's the leader of all the animals. And the deer, when you see the antlers are like antennas. So they look over and watch out for danger and they protect the people. So this is what we choose for our leaders to wear on their gastoe, we call it, the headdress. So when they're installed as a chief, they have these deer antlers, which is really amazing. It's a beautiful contribution to, I think, to the animal world, right? So I come from that long line of people, and Shenandoah actually went to Valley Forge and helped save George Washington's army during the Revolutionary War. And we actually hold a peace medal that was given to him from George Washington, which is amazing. So there's some phenomenal history in our country that we're not aware of. But, you know, during these times, I was thinking about this particular song that I could sing for you if that would work. And I see that Peter is there with your harp. So,
yes, Peter wanted to say hello. Hi, Peter. You need to unmic yourself at the bottom left of your.
How's that? How's
Perfect.
that?
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Joanne. Wow, so good to meet you here. I love your music for many years, and actually, I was telling Pamela earlier, one of your albums has been in rotation on the multiple CD player here for a long time. Is that album of yours? It's like the whole album is like one song. It's like The Weaving or something. It's like a slow chant, the whole thing. Beautiful. I love that one.
thank you. I'm actually playing with a harpist tomorrow for CBS.
Oh, who is that?
A friend of mine, Bambi Niles. We did a Christmas album
Okay.
a couple of years ago.
Right. And I also just real briefly, I just wanted to mention you've been in the conversation recently because I'm recording and producing a young Native American artist, Caitlin River Tree, who lives here in Sedona. She's a beautiful Native American maiden and just really talented with all of her art and her beading and her weaving and her music. And I just felt inspired to help her to record her music. So, and I told her about you. And I told her, like, she reminds me of you, kind of like a younger version of you. She's 28. And
40.
yeah, right. I see the
You're the younger version
similarities.
of
So,
you too, Joanne.
anyway, kind of synchronistic to be here with you. So thank you.
Oh, great. Well, I'll sing you this one song. Then maybe Peter, you want to share a song?
Yeah, do you want me to play a harp? Are you going to play a song now?
I think I don't think on Zoom we can do it together.
Yes.
It only allows one voice at a time. But
Yeah.
we'll sing you this one song because I want to lift the spirit. That's what I always.
And then Peter, maybe you could play for a little minute for us after Joanne.
I absolutely could. Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
So this song is called "We Will Rise Up," and goes like this. I am standing on the edge of wondering where to go. Love and hatred filled my being, torn in this world of woe. What happened to the love we knew and the way we cared back then? Prophecies are coming true. This, I'm sorry, will not be the end. So, oh no, this will.
It's wonderful when he sings with you, Joanne. It's wonderful.
Oh my gosh. In my darkest hour, don't be afraid. When others lose their way, we will rise up. We will rise up. We will rise up and see the way.
beautiful. Could you do one more, Joanne?
Yay! Yay! Yay!
Encore, encore, please.
Encore. Bear loves it. Hi, Ryder. I was waiting to see you.
Teddy bear. He's saying teddy bear.
Hello. Are you gonna sing with us another song with Joanne?
Yeah, I'll sing another one. This one is a song I asked the ancestors for before we sang at the Vatican and for His Holiness at the Syracuse Dome. Would you? Because he just loves this. Anyway, he's going to be a Zoom master, I'm sure. Oh my gosh. Okay, the words translate to this. May there be peace to all people around the world. Let our minds be one. Kana aizi wanandonyo hage. Skana aizi wanandonyo hage. Ahun jigwego. Ahun jigwego. Ungwa nigola. Ungwa nigola. Kana aizi wanandonyo hage. Kana aizi wanandonyo hage. Oh, jigwego. Oh, jigwego. Ungwa nigola. Ungwa nigola. Kana aizi wanandonyo hage. Kana aizi wanandonyo hage. Ahu jigwego. Ahu jigwego. Ungwa nigola. Ungwa nigola.
Beautiful.
That feels like a beautiful lullaby.
I guess we're ready for Peter now.
Okay, so Peter is going to offer something to all of us and specifically to you, Joanne, because he loves you so much. And we might run a tiny bit over, but I'm wondering, does Doug possibly have the capability to read something to us from his books?
He's gonna look. But let's hear Peter first. What do you think?
Okay, yes, perfect.
Okay, I will play a little something for you. I just wanted to give a shout out to Norton, his beautiful painting. I've been watching him, and I was just quite impressed by the way you just swiped the whole image that I've been watching develop over the whole thing, and now you started on a new one. So, very nice work. Just a little harp lullaby for a minute or two on the Sunday night. How's that sound?
A little more tinny than it would if we were with you, but beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
You're
Peter
welcome.
is Grammy nominated. Joanne was talking about how the categories changed, like from having a native category that you're in the folk category. And Peter, are you in the new age
Well,
category?
yeah, thank you for letting me clarify. I'm not nominated. I was in the first round of voting this year.
Oh,
They just announced the nominations last week, and um, so I'm not one of them. But thank you. I enjoyed being a nominee on the call tonight for a few moments. So thank you.
thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank
Cool.
you. Beautiful.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
letting me play for you.
Very, very beautiful. I hope
Mhm.
we get a chance to play together. I'm hoping to come to that area in the spring.
I hope you can come to Sedona, and I do backcountry tours here for 30 years. I take people to the sacred sites in my Jeep, and I do
Right.
my music and my sound healing on the land with my clients here, and I have
Beautiful.
my art is in the galleries here in town. So
Wow.
I have a
Very
pretty cool little scene going on here. I hope Pamela could come visit sometime too. And look, is that a harpist in the painting? Look at Norton's. Looks like now there's a harp in the painting.
Oh, that's so cool.
That is cool.
You know, I have a
Thank
lot
you,
of
Norton.
respect for you because I tried
That's very cool, Norton.
a small Celtic harp and
Ah,
keep it in tune is like impossible.
uh-huh. Keeping it in tune.
Yeah. It's just like nonstop trying to keep it in tune.
It is, yes.
I have a lot of respect for someone.
Thank you.
Really, it's so beautiful. I love it.
Mm.
I wish I had more patience and time. But it's very lovely. Thank you for that.
You're
Introduction.
welcome.
Joanne, may we mention also your daughter? Since we're speaking, she's also a singer.
Yes, she has an album with the rest of the Movement, her first album. She's won the best what was it, the artist recording of the year for the Native American Music Awards, and
Mm,
also working on her dissertation now from Cornell University,
mm.
PhD. She's a cum laude graduate of RIT and also from Syracuse University. So I'm very proud of her.
And what
Her name
name is she recording under?
Her name is Leah Shenandoah, Leah, and you can look her online too.
I'll look her up.
Made the website, but I need to update it.
Mm.
And her work is like phenomenal, really
Mm.
phenomenal. Yeah, I'm very proud of her. She'll be doing an album with David Amram. Wanted to mention that Tony Falco offered up his studio or his venue for us to come record there. So we're gonna work on that first thing in the new year. Very excited.
Mm.
So it has come to that time of the night, everybody, where we're going to be closing up shop. But usually, Joanne, we like to have like a little fun. This is kind of like a jazz club improv night feel. And if Doug has anything that he would like to read us off with, and we could have Peter giving us a little background harp at the same time as I switch over to Norton doing his thing over there. We can have this cool collaborative like send off, and then David, it will be on you to cue us off for the night. How does that sound, everybody?
Sounds
awesome.
like a Zoom jam.
Is that good for you, Joanne and Doug?
Want me to start?
Yes, Doug, you go when you're ready.
Okay. This is from one of my recent essays. Moreover, we have completed all matters that follow in the family through the generations.
Okay, Joanne, may I stop for a minute? I think perhaps Doug needs to be closer to the mic because he's cutting in and out. And Peter, I'm going to ask you to wait and let Doug get started so the Zoom recognizes his voice
Okay.
so we
Okay.
can hear better. Thank you.
We're ready. Here I'll go. I'll start. It's from one of my recent essays. Moreover, we have completed all that follow in the family through the generations, and these shall last as long as the earth exists, and as long as they are going to grow, the grasses. As long as the springs emerge, the waters of the rivers will keep flowing. As long as the sun keeps rising, and the moon keeps up its phases, and in the sky, the stars do the same. and the wind is stirring on the land, and the heavenly bodies continue to provide light by day and by night. Thus it shall last.
Beautiful. David, you going to join in? Oh, the wizard's back. May we say hello to James Canary? James, I'd love for you to say hello to Joanne and Doug.
James Canary.
They accepted the award.
What
for
do you have to say
Canary.
in the native realm? James, your mic, you need, yes, thank you.
I just wanted to thank you so much. Really enjoyed meeting you and your
Yeah.
presence tonight. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's one good-looking, happy guy.
Joanne, I want to
Jim
thank
takes care of the scroll of On the Road.
Yeah.
he's the
I'm happy because I just had 3 baby goats born. This
Hey.
morning I had one just came in my hands.
Yeah.
And that transformation from their water world to this world is amazing.
Beautiful.
Well, they take the 3 sacred breaths, and once they do that, their
Yeah.
life. Yeah, wonderful.
And usually we ended the show with a thank you, which is a word that's almost disappeared from the English vocabulary. So thank you, Joanne Shenandoah and Doug George, for staying up late after driving all over the country and for taking the time when you're not even home yet in a bed and breakfast somewhere to honor us with your presence and all the beautiful things that you said. Thank you, Pamela, for helping to put all this together. Thank you, Anthony, for your wonderful work, Jim Canary, and the fabulous Mr. Anthony Demarvier for his incredible work, and Peter Sterling for his beautiful harp playing. And if you're not nominated, remember Charles Ives said when he was offered something and he was in his 80s and he'd been ignored, he said, "I don't accept it. Badges are, no, awards are the badges of mediocrity." I don't think that's necessarily true, but Stravinsky said music expresses itself, and you just played for us. It was so beautiful. Who cares about all the rest of the stuff? That comes and goes, but beauty lasts forever. Jack Kerouac's works last forever, and what Joanne and Doug have been telling us also has been here a long time and will be here when we're all long gone. So with all blessings to you, a little song that for Joanne on the old Cheyenne flute that she heard 40 years ago when she met. Good night. See you all next week with Larry Kerwin, all the way from the Emerald Isle. And he will discuss how Jack Kerouac influenced him and how Irish music and Irish